Peter Curtin, also known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf and the Düsseldorf Monster, was a notorious German serial killer who committed a series of murders and sexual assaults between February and November of 1929 in Düsseldorf, Germany. Curtin had a lengthy criminal record for offences including arson and attempted murder. Curtin became known as the Vampire of Düsseldorf because he occasionally made attempts to drink the blood of his victims' wounds, and the Düsseldorf Monster because most of his murders were committed in Düsseldorf and the surrounding areas, and also due to the savagery he inflicted upon his victims' bodies. Join me as I look into the murders of Peter Curtin here on Corras Investigation. Now, before we get into the crimes committed by Peter, we must first understand his childhood and how he was brought up. Curtin was born into a poverty-stricken, abusive family in Mulham am Rhein on 26 May 1883. His parents were both alcoholics, and Curtin's father frequently beat his wife and children, particularly when he was drunk. Curtin was jailed for 18 months in 1897 for repeatedly raping his eldest daughter, who was aged 13. In 1888, Curtin attempted to drown one of his playmates and later befriended a local dog catcher who often tortured and killed animals. Curtin was the eldest surviving son and frequently refused to return home from school due to his father's physical abuse. He spent much of his time on the streets with petty criminals and social misfits, which led him to commit various forms of petty crime. At the age of 13, Curtin formed a relationship with a girl, but she refused to engage in sexual intercourse. To relieve his sexual urges, he resorted to acts of bestiality with animals, but later claimed he obtained the greatest elation by stabbing them just before achieving orgasm. He began stabbing and slashing animals with increasing frequency to achieve orgasms, but was adamant that it ended when he was observed stabbing a pig. In 1897, Curtin left school and obtained employment as an apprentice molder. He stole all the money in his household and approximately 300 marks from his employer, ran away and began a brief relationship with a prostitute. He was apprehended 4 weeks later and charged with breaking and entering and theft. He was sentenced to 1 month's imprisonment but was released on August 1899, reverting to a life of petty crime. Now let's look at Curtin's first convictions and first murder. Curtin claimed to have committed his first murder on November 1899. In 1930, he confessed to have picked up an 18-year-old girl at Allestrabe and persuaded her to accompany him to Hofgarten. He claimed to have engaged in sex with the girl before strangling her into unconsciousness with his bare hands before leaving the scene, believing her to be dead. Curtin was arrested for fraud in 1900 and later arrested on the same charge, adding charges related to his 1899 Düsseldorf thefts and attempted murder of a girl with a firearm. He was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment in October 1900 and served his sentence in Derendorf, a borough in Düsseldorf. In 1904, Curtin was drafted into the Imperial German Army and deployed in Metz in Lorraine. He began committing acts of arson, which he would discreetly watch from a distance as emergency services attempted to extinguish the fires. He admitted to committing around 24 acts of arson upon his arrest that New Year's Eve due to his desertion. Curtin was tried by the military court and convicted of desertion, multiple counts of arson, robbery, and attempted robbery. He was imprisoned from 1905 to 1913, serving his sentence in Munster, which much of his time spent in solitary confinement for repeated instances of insubordination Curtin later claimed that this period of incarceration was the first encounter with severe forms of discipline, leading to the development of graphic fantasies of striking out at society and killing masses of people. He occasionally spontaneously ejaculated while preoccupied with these thoughts. And now let's look into the victims and the murders of the Düsseldorf Monster. In 1913, Curtin committed his first murder of a 9-year-old girl, Christine Klein, during a burglary in Mollem am Rhein. He strangled Klein and slashed her throat twice with a pocket knife, ejaculating as he heard the blood dripping from her wounds onto the floor by the bed on his hand. The following day, Curtin returned to Cologne to drink in a tavern located directly opposite the murder scene, where he derived an extreme sense of gratification from the general disgust, repulsion, and outrage he had heard from his patrons' conversations. 2 months later, Curtin broke into a home in Düsseldorf and manually strangled Gertrude Franken, ejaculating at a sight of blood spouting from her mouth before leaving the crime scene. He managed to escape from the scene from this attempted murder and earlier murder of Klein undetected. On 14 July, Curtin was arrested for a series of arson attacks and burglaries and sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. He served the sentence in a military prison in Brugge, then part of the German Empire. After being released in April 1921, Curtin relocated to Altenburg, where he initially lived with his sister. Through his sister, Curtin became acquainted with a woman named August Scharf, a sweet shop proprietor and former prostitute who had been convicted of shooting her fiancé to death. 2 years later, Curtin and Scharf married, but Curtin admitted he could consummate their marriage only by fascinating about committing violence against another individual. In 1925, Curtin returned with Scharf to Düsseldorf, where he began affairs with a servant girl named Tiede and a housemaid named Mech. Both women were frequently subjected to partial strangulation when they submitted to intercourse, with Tiede once being informed by Curtin that that's what love means. He stalked a middle-aged woman named Apollina Kuhn, stabbed her 24 times with a sharpened pair of scissors, and strangled a 9-year-old girl named Rosa Ollinger into unconsciousness before stabbing her in the stomach, temple, genitals, and heart. Ollinger's body was found beneath a hedge the following day. 5 days later, Curtin murdered a 45-year-old mechanic named Rudolf Scher in the suburb of Flingenoord, stabbing him 20 times, particularly about the head, back, and eyes. This seemingly random selection of these victims led criminologists to remark as of the abnormal nature of the perpetrator. Curtin attempted to strangle 4 women between March and July of 1929, one of whom he have claimed to have thrown into the Rhine River. However, he is not known to have killed any further victims until August 11th, when he raped, strangled, and repeatedly stabbed a young woman named Maria Hahn. Curtin had first encountered Hahn on August 8th and had arranged to take her on a date to the Neanderthal district of Düsseldorf the following Sunday. After several hours in Hahn's company, Curtin lured her into a meadow in order to kill her. He later admitted Hahn was repeatedly pleaded with him to spare her life, as he ultimately strangled her, stabbed her in the chest and head, or sat astride her body waiting for her to die. Hahn died approximately 1 hour after Curtin had begun attacking her. Fearful his wife might connect the bloodstains, she noted on his clothes with Hans' murder. Curtin later buried the body in a cornfield, only to return to her body several weeks later with the intention of nailing her decomposing remains to a tree in mock of the crucifixion to shock and disgust the public. However, Hans' remains proved to be too heavy for Curtin to complete this act, and he simply returned her corpse to the grave before embracing and caressing the decomposing body as he lay beneath her remains. Following the Hahn murder, Curtin changed his choice of weapon from scissors to a knife in an apparent effort to convince police more than one perpetrator was responsible for the unfolding crime spree. In early morning of August 21st, he randomly stabbed an 18-year-old girl, a 30-year-old man, and a 37-year-old woman in separate attacks. All three were seriously wounded and all stated to the police their assailant had not spoken a word to them before he had attacked them. The following day, Curtin accosted a 27-year-old housemaid named Gertrude Schult, whom he openly asked to engage in sex with him. Upon being rebuffed, Curtin shouted, "Well, die then," before repeatedly stabbing the woman in the head, neck, shoulder, and back. Schultz survived her injuries, although she was unable to provide investigators with a clear description of her assailant, beyond assuming his age to be around 40. Curtin attempted to murder two further victims, one by strangulation and the other by stabbing, in September before opting to predominantly use a hammer in his murders. In September 1929, Curtin encountered Ida Reuter, a 31-year-old servant girl at Düsseldorf station. He persuaded her to accompany him to a cafe and walk through the local Hofgarten near Rhine River. Curtin repeatedly struck Reuter's head with a hammer before and after raping her. Reuter regained consciousness and pleaded with Curtin to spare her life, but Curtin simply gave her another hammer blow on the head and misused her. 11 days later, Curtin encountered Elizabeth Dorrier, a 22-year-old servant girl, and struck her head and both temples with a hammer. Dorrier was found in a coma and died from her injuries the following day. On 25th October, Curtin attacked two women with a hammer, both of whom survived. On 7 November 1929, Curtin encountered Gertrude Albermann, a 5-year-old girl, in the Flurgen district of Düsseldorf. He seized her by the throat, strangled her, stabbed her 34 times in the temple and chest, before placing her body in a pile of nettles close to the factory wall. And now let's look at the investigation and arrest of the Düsseldorf Monster. In late 1929, the murders committed by the individual the press had dubbed the Vampire of Düsseldorf were receiving considerable national and international attention. Due to the sheer savagery of the murders, the diverse backgrounds of the victims, and the differing methods in which they had been assaulted and or murdered, both the police and the press theorized the spate of assaults and murders were in the work of more than one perpetrator. By the end of 1929, Düsseldorf police had received more than 13,000 letters from the public, with assistance from the surrounding police forces. As a result of the collective investigation into the killings, more than 9,000 individuals were interviewed, 2,650 other clues were painstakingly pursued, and a list of 900,000 different names were compiled upon an official potential suspect list. 2 days after the murder of Gertrude Albermann, a local communist newspaper received a map revealing the location of the grave of Maria Hahn. In the drawing, Curtin revealed precisely where he had left Albermann's body, which had been found earlier that day, describing the exact position of her corpse, which he had stated could be found face down among bricks and rubble. An analysis of the handwriting revealed the author was the same individual who had anonymously informed the police in the letter dated 14 October that he had killed Hahn and buried her body at the edge of the woods. Each of these 3 letters Curtin had thus far sent the newspaper, and the police describing his exploits and threatening further assaults and murders were examined by a graphologist leading Ernst Gernot, chief inspector of the Berlin police, to conclude that one man was responsible for most of all of the spate of assaults and murders. In 1930, the murder of Gertrude Albermann proved to be Curtin's final fatal attack, although he did engage in a spate of non-fatal hammer attacks and attempted strangulations between February and May of 1930, maiming 10 victims in these assaults. All the victims survived, and many were able to describe their attacker to the police. On 14th of May 1930, an unknown man approached a 20-year-old woman named Maria Butluck at Düsseldorf station. He offered to direct her towards a local hostel. Butluck agreed to follow the man, but she became apprehensive when he attempted to lead her through a scarily populated park. The pair began to argue, and the other man approached the two, asking where Butluck was being pestered by her companion. When Butluck nodded, the man with whom she had arguing simply walked away. The identity of the man who reportedly came to Butluck's aid was Peter Curtin. Curtin invited the distressed young woman to his apartment, Met Manner Strabe, to eat and drink before he lured her into the Grafenberg woods, where he seized her by the throat and attempted to strangle her as he raped her. When Butluck began to scream, Curtin released his grip on her throat before allowing her to leave. Although Curtin was not at home when Butluck and Gennard searched his property, he spotted the pair at the communal hallway and promptly left. Knowing that his identity was now known to the police and suspecting that they have been connected to him to the crimes committed by the vampire of Düsseldorf, he confessed to his wife that he had raped Butluck and that because of his previous convictions, he may receive 15 years penal labor. Curtin was extensively interviewed by Karl Berg as he awaited his trial and execution. Curtin claimed that his primary motive for criminal activity was sexual pleasure, and he associates sexual excitement with violent acts and the sight of blood. He often committed assaults and murders when his wife was working evenings, and the number of wounds inflicted on each victim varied depending on the length of the time it took to achieve an orgasm. The sight of a victim's blood was integral to his sexual stimulation. Curtin was also explained that once he had committed an attack or murder, the feeling of tension would be replaced by one of relief. He used various weapons in his attacks to deceive investigators into believing they were seeking multiple perpetrators, but the weapon used was inconsequential to his ultimate objective of seeing the victim's blood. He admitted that occasionally piercing his female victims was done to feign the act of coitus as a motive for his crimes. However, Curtin contradicted these claims by claiming that his primary motive was to strike back at oppressive society for the injustice of his repeated incarceration throughout his life and as a form of revenge for the neglect and abuse he had endured as a child. He deliberately broke minor prison rules to ensure that he will be sentenced to solitary confinement to indulge his psychological fantasies. Both Berg and other psychologists concluded that Curtin was not insane, fully able to control his actions, and appreciated the criminality of his conduct. They ruled Curtin legally sane and competent to stand trial. Now we get into the trial of Peter Curtin. In 1931, Peter Curtin was tried in Düsseldorf for 9 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to each charge. Curtin spent the duration of his trial surrounded by a heavily guarded soldier-high iron cage specifically constructed to protect him from attack by the enraged relatives of the victims. The prosecution formally recited each of the charges against Curtin before they recited the formal confession he had provided to the police following his arrest. Curtin explained that his desire for injuring people awoke and the love of setting fire to things awoke as well. He claimed that he had no misgiving in his soul and never thought that he did was bad, even though human society condemned it. Curtin responded to the presiding judge's question as to whether he possessed a conscience at the trial, claiming that he had no remorse. He stated that he enjoyed thinking back at all the details of his deeds and that he would not consider himself to possess a conscience. However, he pressed about his motivation in confessing. Curtin reiterated that he was fond of his wife and that he had done many wrong things and been unfaithful over and over again. To counteract Curtin's insanity defense, the prosecution introduced 5 eminent doctors and psychiatrists to testify. Each testified that Curtin was legally sane and had been in control of his actions and impulses all of the time. Franz Solé testified that Curtin's motivation in his crimes was the desire to achieve sexual gratification he demanded, and that his satisfaction could only be achieved by acts of brutality, violence, and Curtin's knowledge of the pain and misery his actions caused to others. Further evidence of Curtin's awareness was referenced by the preeminent nature of his crimes, his ability to abandon an attack if he sensed the risk of being disturbed, and his acute memory of both his crimes and a chronicle detail. The deaths of the 2 boys of whom Curtin had confessed to drowning at the age of 9 were also disclosed in the first week of the trial. Upon cross-examination, Curtin's defense attorney Alec Werner challenged these experts' conclusion, arguing the sheer range of preservations his client had engaged in was tantamount to insanity. However, each doctor and psychiatrist remained adamant as to Curtin being legally sane and responsible for his actions. In a further attempt to discredit the validity of many of the charges recited at the opening stages of the trial, Werner also questioned whether the occasional physical inaccuracies of the crimes described in the client's confession equated to Curtin having fabricated at least some of the crimes, thus supporting his contention Curtin possessed a diseased mind. Burke conceded that sections of Curtin's confessions were false, but argued that the knowledge he possessed of the murder scenes and the wounds inflicted upon his victims left him no doubt as to his guilt, and that the minor embellishments in his confessions could be attributed to Curtin's narcissistic personality. The trial lasted 10 days, and on 22nd of April, the jury found Curtin guilty of 9 counts of murder and 7 counts on attempted murder. Curtin displayed no emotion during the sentence, but he expressed his ghastliness in his final address. He did not appeal his conviction, but submitted the petition for pardon to the Minister of Justice, who rejected it. And now we get to the final days of the Düsseldorf Monster, Peter Curtin. On July 1st, 1931, Curtin ordered a Wiener Schnitzel and a white wine as its last meal. He requested a second helping, which was granted. On July 2nd, he was beheaded via guillotine at the Kingerpulch prison, Cologne, by Karl Groppler, with a prison psychiatrist and a priest present. Curtin, before his head was guillotined, asked a prison psychiatrist if he could hear his own blood gushing from his neck stump for a moment after being chopped off. Curtin replied that he had no last words and was satisfied with the end of all his pleasures. Today we are going to look at a case which evokes mysticism as well as criticism for the way this case has been handled. Join me as I delve into the Chicago Strangler here on Corras Investigation. The Chicago Strangler refers to a potential serial killer or killers believed responsible for at least 51 unsolved murders in Chicago between 1999 and 2018. The victims, primarily African American women involved in sex work or struggling with substance abuse, were found strangled and discarded in secluded locations such as alleyways or abandoned buildings. Despite the disturbing pattern of killings, the Chicago Police Department, which I'll refer to as the CPD, has not officially linked the cases due to the lack of evidence. This has sparked significant concern and criticism, particularly from the victims' communities who believe that the systematic biases contributed to the lack of urgency in the investigations. Independent analysis like those from the Murder Accountability Project have highlighted the statistical patterns that strongly suggest the involvement of a serial killer. The term Chicago Strangler captures both the fear of an active serial killer and the frustration of the perceived negligence by the law enforcement. The case remains one of Chicago's most chilling unsolved mysteries, with ongoing calls for more thorough investigation. Let's first look at the victims. The suspected Chicago Strangler victims were predominantly African American women from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, many of whom were involved in sex work or had histories with drug addiction. The victims, ranging from their teens to their 50s, shared commonalities in their lifestyles and the circumstances of their deaths. The consistent method of strangulation, either manually or with a ligature, and the disposal of the bodies in remote or abandoned locations, particularly in economically depressed areas of Chicago's South and West Side, suggested a disturbing pattern. These locations were often areas with limited police presence and community resources. The similar profiles and consistent method of killing led to some criminologists to believe that a single perpetrator or small group of perpetrators might be responsible for the murders. Despite the patterns, the CBD has not publicly linked the cases, complicating efforts to connect the murders definitely. The unresolved nature of these cases left a profound impact on the affected communities, fueling fear and frustration. Now let's get into the theories regarding the Chicago Strangler. Theories regarding the Chicago Strangler vary, with some criminologists and analysts believing that a single individual is responsible for most of the murders. This theory is supported by the consistent method of strangulation and the similar victim profiles. Others suggest that multiple killers might be involved, possibly operating independently as copycats. Another theory speculates that the murders were committed by opportunistic killers who preyed on vulnerable women, with a similarity in the method of killing coincidental. A more critical theory focuses on systematic issues such as racism and classism that might have contributed to the failure to solve these cases. Some even suggest that organized crime or traffic networks could have been involved, using murder as a means of control or punishment. Despite these theories, the CPD has officially not endorsed any theories, citing a lack of conclusive and forensic evidence. The uncertainty continues to fuel fear and distrust within the community. Now, the main reason why a lot of people are very dissatisfied with this case is the involvement of the police. Let's look into this. The CPD initially investigated each murder individually rather than as part of a connected series, largely due to the absence of definitive forensic evidence linking the cases. This approach, combined with the varying levels of urgency depending on the case, left many murders unsolved for years. Despite apparent patterns, the CPD has hesitated to declare the murders as the work of a serial killer, citing the lack of conclusive evidence. This hesitancy has drawn significant criticism from the community and activists, who argue that systematic issues led to the deprioritization of these cases. In response to the public pressure, the CPD has occasionally revisited the cases, sometimes with assistance from federal agencies like the FBI. However, the formation of the dedicated task force has been inconsistent, and the case remains open with no definitive evidence pointing to a single perpetrator. And what about the suspects? Surely they must have some idea of who the suspect is. Well, unfortunately, no suspects have been officially identified or charged in connection with the broader series or murders attributed to the Chicago Strangler. Although there have been arrests in individual strangulation cases, none have been conclusively linked to the patterns of murders. The significant challenges in identifying a suspect lies in the lack of conclusive forensic evidence that could connect the cases. The victims' transit lives and the poor preservation of evidence have further complicated efforts to trace their last known whereabouts or establish a clear timeline. The Murder Accountability Project conducted an analysis suggesting potential connections between cases, but no specific individual has been identified by law enforcement. As of the most recent reports, the investigation remains active, with the CPD and other agencies continuing to follow leads. However, without new breakthroughs, the identity of the Chicago Strangler remains unknown, leaving the case shrouded in mystery. And there we have it. It's a little bit of a shorter case, so sorry if it's a little bit short. I was a little bit busy this week, so yeah. But yeah, if there's any cases that you like me to investigate, please let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Until next one, peace and cheers. The SS Waratah, a passenger and cargo steamship, was a marvel of the early 20th century shipbuilding, designed to traverse the challenging seas between the United Kingdom and Australia. Launched in 1908 by prestigious Barclay, Curle & Co. Limited in Glasgow, the Waratah was named after a native Australian flower and symbolized the connection between the continents. However, its promising future was cut short when it mysteriously vanished in 1909, en route from Durban to Cape Town, South Africa. Despite numerous search efforts and extensive investigations, the disappearance of the Waratah remains one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. This narrative delves into the ship's final sightings, eyewitness accounts, and the theories surrounding the ship's fate, offering a comprehensive exploration of what might have transpired during its last ill-fated voyage. Join me as I investigate the disappearance of the SS Waratah. Before we look into the disappearance, let's just first check the features of the SS Waratah. The SS Waratah was a steamship built in 1908 by the reputable shipbuilding company Barclay, Curle & Co. in Glasgow, Scotland. Designed for the Blue Anchor Line, which operated passenger and cargo services between the United Kingdom and Australia, the Waratah was meant to serve as a luxury passenger liner, combining the roles of a passenger and cargo ship. Here are the specifications of the ship. Length, 142 meters. Beam, 18 meters. Draught, 9.85 meters. Gross tonnage, 9.339 tons. Speed, approximately 30 knots, which is 24 kilometers an hour. The Waratah was lavishly appointed with accommodations for 750 passengers, including 128 first-class cabins. The interiors were designed to offer comfort and luxury, featuring dining rooms, smoking rooms, and lounges, which were a mark of elegance and sophistication for sea travel during that era.
The maiden voyage. The Waratah embarked on a maiden voyage from London to Australia in November 1908. Her journey included stops at various ports such as Plymouth, Cape Town, Durban, Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. The ship successfully completed her first round trip without significant incident, despite some reports of instability and concerns over her seaworthiness from a few passengers and cabin crew members. These reports, however, were largely dismissed or downplayed by the ship's operators and builders. And now we get into the final voyage and the last sightings of the SS Waratah. The SS Waratah departed from Durban, South Africa on 26 July 1909 and en route to Cape Town. This leg was part of its journey back to the United Kingdom after visiting several ports in Australia. The ship was carrying 211 passengers and crew members, as well as a significant amount of cargo. As the Waratah left Durban, the weather was reported to be worsening, with strong winds and high seas. The southern coast of Africa is known for its unpredictable and often treacherous weather, which can be included sudden storms and heavy swells. These conditions have posed a challenge to the ship and its crew. The last confirmed sighting of the SS Waratah was by a crew of the Clan McIntyre, another steamship. This encounter occurred on 27 July 1909, approximately 12 miles off the Bashi River, known as the Mbase, on the east coast of South Africa. Captain Bruce of Clan McIntyre reported seeing the Waratah around 6 p.m. He noted that the Waratah was maintaining a steady course but appeared to be struggling in the heavy seas. Despite rough conditions, Captain Bruce did not observe any signs of distress or emergency signals from the Waratah. He assumed that the ship, like his own, was contending with the adverse weather. Crew members aboard the Clan McIntyre also observed the Waratah. They described the ship as rolling heavily and noted that it seemed to be laboring in the high waves. However, similar to Captain Bruce, they did not see any signals of trouble. The visibility was reduced due to the worsening weather, making it difficult to maintain a clear view of the Waratah. Subsequent sightings and unverified reports. The Harlow incident. One of the more controversial and debated reports came from the crew of Harlow, a coastal steamer. According to this account, Harlow was sailing in the vicinity of the Waratah's route on evening of July 27, 1909. The crew reported seeing a large ship in the distance that matched the Waratah's description. They claimed that they have witnessed what to be appeared flashing lights, which some interpreted as distress signals or explosions. However, the sighting remains unverified and is subject to skepticism. Critics argue that the Harlow's crew could have mistaken it for another vessel, especially given the challenging weather conditions and limited visibility. Search efforts and investigation. When the Waratah failed to arrive in Cape Town, a search operation was quickly launched. The Blue Anchor Line, along with the South African authorities, coordinated efforts to locate the missing ship. Ships were dispatched to scour the coastline and adjacent waters, but no trace of the Waratah was found. The search continued for several months, with various ships and resources dedicated to finding the Waratah. Despite these extensive efforts, including the use of surface vessels and later aerial reconnaissance, the ship's whereabouts remained a mystery. The disappearance of the Waratah prompted multiple inquiries and investigations. The most significant was conducted by the British Board of Trade, which examined the ship's construction, stability, and circumstances of its final voyage. The inquiry concluded that while the Waratah had some design flaws, there was insignificant evidence to determine the exact cause of the disappearance. Now we get into my parts of this video. The theories as to why the ship disappeared. First, rogue waves. One theory suggests that the Waratah might have been struck by a rogue wave, which are exceptionally large and unexpected waves that can pose a serious threat to ships. Rogue waves are known to have potential to overturn or destroy vessels, and if the Waratah encountered one, this could explain a sudden and complete disappearance of the ship. Despite the ship's design and safety features, a rogue wave could have overwhelmed it, leading it to its sinking. Structural failure. Another theory posits that the Waratah may have to have been suffered from a structural failure, such as a hull breach or damage to the ship's machinery. Given the ship's size and the rough conditions it encountered, it's possible that a critical failure in its structure and propulsion system could have caused it to sink rapidly. The ship's design, while modern for its time, might have been vulnerable to the extreme conditions. Human error. Some speculate that human error may have been a role in the Waratah's disappearance. This could include misadjustments by the ship's crew, navigation errors, or failure to take appropriate actions in response to the worsening weather. For instance, the ships navigating too close to the shore or encountered hazardous conditions without adequate precaution. Cargo issues. The Waratah was carrying a diverse cargo, and it's possible that the issues related to the cargo could have contributed to the disaster. For example, if the cargo was not properly secured or it had shifted significantly during the voyage, it could have caused the ship to become unstable or difficult to control. Piracy or sabotage. Another less likely but still possible theory suggests that there could have been piracy or sabotage. While there was no substantial evidence to support this theory, it remains a speculative one. If the ship could have been attacked or sabotaged, it could explain the lack of wreckage, as perpetrators might have taken steps to hide their action. Cyclone or storm. The weather condition reported during the Waratah's final voyage included rough seas and strong winds. Some theories suggested that the ship may have encountered a severe storm or cyclone, which could have led to its sinking. Such extreme weather conditions could have overwhelmed the vessel's design safety features, leading it to a catastrophic loss. Modern advances into this investigation. In recent decades, advances in technology have renewed interest in the Waratah. Modern sonar and underwater exploration equipment have been used in attempts to locate the wreck. However, the vast and often treacherous waters off the coast of South Africa have made these efforts challenging. Several expeditions have reported discovering potential wreckage sites, but none of them have been conclusively identified as the Waratah. The deep waters and strong currents in the region complicate efforts to explore these areas and verify the sites. The fate of the SS Waratah remains one of the great unsolved maritime mysteries. Despite the lost sightings and numerous theories, the exact events that led to the ship's disappearance continue to elude investigations and historians. So to conclude this video, the SS Waratah's disappearance off the coast of South Africa in 1909 continues to intrigue and mystify historians, maritime enthusiasts, and the public. Despite the last confirmed sighting by the Clan McIntyre and controversial report from the Harlow, the exact cause of the Waratah's fate remains elusive. Adverse weather conditions, potential structural issues, and various other theories have been proposed, yet none have been conclusively proven. Modern technology has renewed efforts to locate the wreck, but the vast and treacherous waters where the Waratah vanished complicate these endeavors. As we reflect on the final moments of this ill-fated ship, the story of the Waratah endures as a reminder of the sea's unpredictable nature and many mysteries it still holds. The legacy of the SS Waratah continues to capture the imagination, ensuring that the quests for the answers and the fascination with the maritime enigma remain alive. In the shadowy labyrinth of late 19th century London, a series of macabre discoveries began to unfold along the banks of the River Thames. Between 1887 and 1889, the Victorian public was gripped by a sequence of ghastly crimes, later known as the Thames Torso Murders. Who were the victims? What was the nature of the killings? And more frustratingly, who
were the suspects? Join me as I will try and answer here on Corras Investigation. Let's first begin with the victims of the Thames Torso Murders. The Thames Torso Murders, spanning from 1887 to 1889, involved the discovery of dismembered human remains across various locations in London, particularly along the River Thames, hence the name of the murders. The identity of most victims remains unknown, and the scattered nature of their remains compounded the mystery. Here is a look into the victims. The first victim is the Rainham mystery. Discovery was initially found on May 11th, 1887, where dock workers near the River Thames in Rainham uncovered a female torso wrapped in cloth floating in the river. Over the following weeks, additional body parts were found. First, on May 18th, a right arm was retrieved from the river. On June 4th, a left leg was discovered, and on June 9th, a right foot surfaced. The details are as follows. The body condition. The torso and limbs were decapitated and dismembered with notable precision, suggesting anatomical knowledge. The age and identity of the victim was estimated to be between 30 to 40 years old. The exact identity remains unknown due to the decompensation and lack of head or identifiable features of the body. The forensic observations concluded that the careful dismemberment pointed towards a person skilled in anatomy or surgery, heightening the intrigue surrounding the case. Victim 2, the Whitehall mystery. The initial find was on September 11th, 1888. Construction workers building the new Scotland Yard headquarters found a decomposed female torso in a cellar vault. Other subsequent finds discovered that a week later, on September 17th, a left leg of the same victim was unearthed in a nearby location, buried under rubble. And the final find of the Whitehall mystery, the victim's right arm was found buried in a grave, discovered months later in October. Also, like the previous victim, here are the details. The body condition. The torso was missing its head and limbs, consistent with the dismemberment, but showed no signs of additional floating parts in the river, unlike the Rainham case. The age and identity. The woman was believed to be 24 years old. The remains were too decomposed to provide positive identification, and no head was ever found to facilitate identification. The forensic observations concluded that the body parts were severed with skill, hinting at an individual with medical and anatomical expertise like the previous victim. The deliberate burial of parts at the construction site suggested an attempt to conceal the crime carefully. Victim 3, the Pinchin Street torso. The initial find was on September 10th, 1889, of a torso of a woman wrapped in cloth was discovered under a railway arch in Pinchin Street, Whitechapel. Subsequent finds, unlike the previous cases, no additional body parts were found nearby or in the Thames. The body condition. The torso was decapitated and missing limbs, but notably lacked the meticulous wrapping and strategic disposal seen in the previous cases. Age and identity. The victim was estimated to be between 30 and 40 years old. The absence of a head and limbs again made the identification impossible. Forensic observations concluded that the location and the condition of the body suggested a hasty disposal. The lack of precision in the wrapping and the absence of other body parts implied of a possible deviation from earlier patterns or a different intent by the murderer. The fourth and final victim 4, the Elizabeth Jackson case. Starting on June 4th, 1889, various body parts began surfacing in the Thames, stretching from Battersea to Limehouse. June 4th, a torso was discovered near Battersea. June 5th, an arm was found floating in the river near Limehouse. And other subsequent finds over the several days, additional body parts, including legs and other limbs, were retrieved from different points along the River Thames. Body condition. The dismemberment showed less precision compared to earlier cases like victim 1 and 2, including a possible different method or even a different murderer. Age and identity. Unlike the previous victims, this one was easily discovered to be of Elizabeth Jackson, a 24-year-old prostitute, through the recognition of specific scars and marks from acquaintances. Forensic observations concluded that Jackson's case differed notably in the extended time frame and less skilled dismemberment. The identification of Jackson added a human face to the victim pool, but lack of precision raised questions about the killer's consistency or intent. Now let's look at the nature of the killings. First, let's check at the modus operandi. The primary characteristic of these murders was the dismemberment of the victims. The level of precision varied, but generally indicated significant anatomical knowledge. The killer disposed of the body in the Thames and other locations, suggesting an attempt to hide the identity of the victims and hinder police investigations. The victim profile suggests that all the victims were female, often young adults. The occupation of these victims is not known because only one victim has been identified, and that was Elizabeth Jackson, and she was a prostitute. So we can't say for sure if he only targeted prostitutes. And because of the nature of these killings, investigators had a big problem solving this case. Primarily due to the identification, because the dismemberment and disposal of body parts in the Thames made it difficult to identify the victims and understand the full extent of the crimes. Investigators also couldn't go to the media or public and ask for any clues because at the same time the Jack the Ripper killings were happening, and that garnered major media attention, possibly overshadowing this case. And also there were forensic limitations because it was the Victorian era, but that wasn't necessarily their fault. Now, let's get into the suspects. First, Frederick Deeming. Frederick Deeming was an English-born criminal known for his violent crimes, including murder of his own wife and children. His relevance to the case is because Deeming was considered a suspect in both Jack the Ripper and the Thames Torso murders due to the history of brutal violence and his presence in London during the relevant time frame. Notable facts of Deeming: the murder of his family. Deeming murdered his first wife and 4 children in Rainhill, England, before moving to Australia, where he killed his second wife. The timing: Deeming was in England during the time of the Thames Torso murders, 1887 to 1889, and the Jack the Ripper murders. His behavior and background suggest he was known for his deceitful and violent nature. Deeming often used many aliases and moved frequently, which complicated tracking his movements and potential involvement in various crimes. His link to the murders suggests, despite the suspicion, there was no concrete evidence linking Deeming directly to the Thames Torso murders. His known crimes involved different methods, primarily strangulation and bludgeoning, rather than precise dismemberment seen in the torso cases. However, his violent tendencies and presence in London during the murders kept him under consideration as a potential suspect. Our second suspect is Dr. Thomas Neil Cream. Dr. Cream was a Scottish-Canadian physician, notorious for his career as a serial killer, often dubbed as the Lambeth Poisoner. His relevance to the case is that Cream was considered a suspect in the Thames Torso Murders and also the Jack Ripper case due to his medical background, history of violent crimes, and his presence in London during the period of the murders. Notable facts about Dr. Cream. Cream was convicted of multiple murders involving poisoning of his victims, primarily targeting women in Canada, the United States, and England. He is a trained physician. Cream possessed the anatomical knowledge and access to substances that could facilitate the precise dismemberments observed in the Torso Murders. Cream was in London during the 1880s and early 1890s, overlapping the time frame of the Thames Torso Murders and the Jack the Ripper killings. While Cream's medical expertise and violent history made him a suspect, the methods he used to kill, which is primarily poisoning, differed significantly from the dismemberment seen in the Torso Murders. Furthermore, there was no direct evidence linking him to the specific crimes. His arrest and subsequent execution in 1892 for the poisoning did not provide conclusive proof of his involvement in the Thames Torso Murders. However, his profile as a medical knowledgeable killer kept him on a list of potential suspects. Number 3. Francis Tumblety. Francis Tumblety was an American quack doctor and self-proclaimed physician, known for his eccentric personality and dubious medical practices. Tumblety became a suspect in the Thames Torso Murders and the Jack the Ripper case due to his anatomical interest, questionable activities in London, and the timing of his presence during the murders. Here are some notable facts about Mr. Tumblety. Tumblety reportedly had a macabre fascination with collecting female reproductive organs, which aligned disturbingly with the anatomical precision seen in the torso dismemberments. He was in London during the Thames Torso Murders and the Jack the Ripper killings, placing him near the scenes of the crimes. Tumblety was known for his erratic and eccentric behavior, and he was arrested in London in 1888 for unrelated offences. His sudden flight to the United States following the release raised further suspicion. While Tumblety's interest in anatomy and his presence in London during the murders made him a person of interest, there was no direct evidence connecting him to the Thames Torso Murders. The precise dismemberment suggested the work of someone with more hands-on anatomical or surgical expertise than Tumblety was known to possess. Despite the gaps, his behavior and timing kept him under consideration as a suspect in the gruesome torso case. Number 4. Robert Mann. Robert Mann was a mortuary attendant in Whitechapel, an area closely associated with Jack the Ripper. His role gave him access to corpses' anatomical knowledge, making him a person of interest in the Thames Torso Murders. Mann's professional background and proximity to the crimes placed him under scrutiny. His job involved handling dead bodies, and he would have had necessary anatomical awareness to carry out the precise dismemberment seen in the Torso Murders. Mann exhibited unusual and erratic behavior, which led some to speculate that his involvement in the Ripper murders and, by extension, the Torso Murders. Working in Whitechapel area, Mann was near the epicenter of the Ripper murders and within reach of the locations where the torso remains were discovered. As a mortuary attendant, Mann had both the means and the opportunity to dismember bodies, a critical factor in the suspicion against him. Despite the circumstantial connections, there was no direct evidence linking Mann to the Thames Torso Murders. A lack of concrete forensic ties and witness connecting him to the disposal of the murder of the victims left his involvement speculative. His anatomical expertise and suspicious behavior made him a viable suspect, but without definitive proof, his role in the crime remains uncertain. And now we get into the conspiracy theory side of the case. The mad doctor theory. A prevailing theory suggests that a medical professional, possibly a surgeon or someone with anatomical knowledge, could be behind the killings. The precise dismemberment of the bodies indicated a level of skill that might be expected from someone with medical training. The theory posits that the killer may have been conducting macabre experiments or indulging in a twisted fascination of human anatomy. The second and most popular theory is that Jack the Ripper and the Thames Torso Murderer are the same person. Both these killings spanned between 1887 and 1889. Both of these killings had some level of precision to them, and all the victims were female. But personally, I do not believe in this theory. I think there is enough evidence to suggest that these were two very different killers. Although Jack the Ripper killed his victims precisely, the Thames Torso Murder cut out body parts, which Jack the Ripper didn't. And also Jack the Ripper wanted the media and everybody to know that he killed these people. The Thames Torso Murderer wanted to dispose of the bodies and make sure that nobody knows who killed who and who the victims were. So no, I don't think Jack the Ripper and the Thames Torso Murderer are the same person.